next several months we'll be able to meet in person. I feel incredibly humbled and privileged to be in this position in this moment. Very excited and very sort of emboldened and inspired to get to work once I'm sworn in early January. As you all know, and as many of you on this call have probably experienced over the last several months, people are hurting. People are hurting out there tremendously in the wealthiest nation on earth, with so many resources. We have hundreds of thousands of people dead from a global pandemic and millions more who have been impacted either directly or indirectly. So people are hurting from a health standpoint. Our economic system that was in place has been crumbling. Our education system is suffering, and as a result, children, particularly the most vulnerable, are suffering. You may have heard me say this before, but even prior to the pandemic, the main reason I ran for office to begin with is because so many people are struggling to even put food on the table, despite the wealth that we continue to boast about. We have millions of children living in poverty. We have millions of families living in poverty. We have people who are working full time and who have health insurance still struggling paycheck to paycheck. We have the majority of Americans who could not respond to an emergency that requires them to invest more than $400 from their bank account. We have a world in which we engage with international actors more from a military standpoint than from a diplomatic standpoint. There's so much more we can do and so much more we can accomplish if we figure out a way to come together as a nation, as a people, as a world, as opposed to what we currently have in place, which is the majority of resources concentrated in the hands of a few, while the rest of us continue to struggle. So for me, my fight always has begun with our children. And yes, over my 20-year career in education, I've seen children struggle with housing and food insecurity, struggle with mental health illnesses, struggle with poverty, struggle because of the impact of trauma, struggle to learn within a system that doesn't approach them with empathy and compassion and doesn't try to create an environment and a climate that's warm and welcoming and supportive. And the main problem with a lot of this, in my opinion, is the impact of bad policy on the lives of our kids and on our country over a period of not just several decades, but several hundreds of years. Unfortunately, our country was built on the original atrocities of the genocide of the indigenous people and the enslavement of the African people, which has now evolved into economic oppression while having racial segregation in between all of that. So we've just been rooted in a social hierarchy and discrimination based on race and gender and class and religion, and a divide and conquer strategy has been in place for far too long. So I see my role in Congress as a person to call out the history of injustice, call out the true story of our nation and Western civilization overall, and to build hopefully a coalition of people who represent our beautiful diversity, who represent different genders and classes and religions, who are really serious about building a world that works for everyone and building a nation and building a district that works for everyone. And if you know the district fairly well, which I know most of you do, if you drive through the district from the North Bronx up to Rye, New York, you see the tale of two districts. You see the Northeast Bronx, which struggles with poverty rates as high as 30%. The same goes for Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and parts of New Rochelle. But then when you go to other areas like Bronxville and Scarsdale and Larchmont and Riverdale and others, you see, working class, upper middle class, and incredible wealth. And this is not about taking wealth from one area and giving it to another. It's about understanding that, there's an abundance of resources that can be equitably shared and equitably developed across the district and across the country if we just approach it from empathy, compassion, and love, and approach it with a different perspective. I do not have a scarcity mindset. I believe this is a world full of abundant resources for all of us. And once we cure ourselves of a history of discrimination, we'll be able to build that world together. So I look forward to getting to know you and learning from all of you, and you all getting to know me as well, and us figuring out how to build that world, a world in which we're dealing with racial justice, we're dealing with economic injustice, we're dealing with anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and all of the issues that continue to plague us. I want to deal with those issues directly, urgently, and compassionately, and I hope to do that with all of you. So thank you so much for having me. I'll take any questions you have.
Okay, Jamaal, thank you. I have two questions here already. So the first one is, Congressman-elect, congratulations on your election. Do you have any proposals to expand the Affordable Care Act to help it reach its original goals?
So I support Medicare for All, which is a universal healthcare system, single point of delivery, single payer system. In terms of moving from the Affordable Care Act towards a system like that, what's happening now with myself, Pramila Jayapal, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus is we're working with the Biden administration to untether healthcare from employment, which is a huge step in that direction, which will provide millions more with access to healthcare, which strengthens the Affordable Care Act in many ways. So that's the system I'm working towards, and strengthening and making the Affordable Care Act as part of that.
Okay, that's great. So I'm giving you these in the order in which they've come in so far. How should the COVID-19 vaccine be allocated?
Well, we need our first responders, I think, to be vaccinated initially. That's those in the healthcare system, those who provide our food to everyone, those in the education system. I believe our seniors and those in low-income communities should be vaccinated initially as well. All of the communities that are disproportionately impacted by this should be vaccinated initially, and then hopefully we can get everyone vaccinated right after that.
Okay. Bear in mind, they're starting to come in quickly now. Okay, the next one, this is an interesting one. The Black-Jewish relationship has a long, constructive U.S. history, which has weakened in recent years. The Black-Jewish Congressional Caucus, which the AJC, American Jewish Committee, helped launch in 2019, is a positive step to strengthen it. Are you committed to joining this caucus?
Well, I need to initially learn more about the caucus, learn a lot more about it, but it doesn't seem like something that I wouldn't want to join, but I have to learn more about it before making a commitment at this time.
Okay, and the next question, so more on a personal note, what is your personal story of success and growth from single mother home to where you are today?
Well, I guess it's a story of persistence, not just in terms of growing up with a single mom and growing up in, public housing and low income circumstances, but growing up in a tremendous amount of trauma. I'm 44 years old, so I grew up pretty much during the AIDS epidemic and the crack cocaine era happening at the same time, and both disproportionately impacting Black communities. I had a sister who was addicted to crack cocaine, and I have friends who uh, are incarcerated now and or were killed as a result of engaging in the crack cocaine system. I also had friends who suffered from mental illness, and some of them died by suicide as a result of that. I think it's just a story of persistence and a story of just consistently feeling in my bones that the world could be better, and things can be better, and we can overcome the ugly in the world through coming together as a people. And it's not just those personal experiences, but my professional experiences in education as well. I think my story, being someone who, went to public schools my entire life, did not go to Ivy League institutions. I'm not a member of any frat. I don't come from wealth. But despite all of that, just through sort of grit and perseverance and working with others, I was able to, not just have a successful career in education, but also, be the founder of my own school, earn a doctorate in education, run for Congress, and ultimately win. I think it's a story of persistence. And it's a story that I hope, others who are going through any form of trauma or depression or oppression, who don't often see a light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. I hope they look to my story, and I hope they're inspired by that to just keep learning and keep growing and keep moving one day at a time.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Again, I've got a whole raft of them pouring in now. So the next one is the wording is it's more like addressed to me than to you, but to paraphrase the question, you may have a chance to vote on the bipartisan relief bill currently under consideration. With our commenting on whether that statement is accurate, we would like to hear whether you would support that. So I guess it's the current bipartisan relief bill that's being negotiated.
So the bill that's currently being negotiated is much less than what was initially negotiated in the HEROES Act. It is something I would support at this time because people need some type of relief right now. But then we would need to go right back to the table to continue to negotiate the next bill. As we all know, between now and the time President-elect Biden is sworn in, there's a lot that can happen. One big thing that can happen is we can win 2 Senate seats in Georgia. And if that were to happen, we bring a lot more leverage to the next round of negotiations, if they were to happen or when they are to happen after this bill runs its course, if you will. So yes, I would support this bill, but we would be right back at the table negotiating the next bill because we have to be. And I hope everyone on this call is doing everything they can to leverage all the resources you can to help us win Georgia. Because if we can get those 2 Senate seats, we can disempower Mitch McConnell, and we can get a lot more done. Let me also say that for me, rebuilding our economy is not just about responding to the coronavirus. It's about answering the question, how do we build an economy that gives every single person the opportunity to thrive when we're past the coronavirus? As you know, we have a tax system that's regressive. Many people are underemployed and unemployed, uninsured and underinsured. So this is our New Deal moment to literally build a new economy. So in addition to the stimulus work that we have to do, we have to rebuild our economy overall. And for me, that involves raising the federal minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, providing a federal jobs guarantee, reforming the tax code so that the wealthy pay their fair share and large corporations pay their fair share as well, and just giving everyone the opportunity to access to affordable housing, food security, etc. So a lot to do, but yes, I would support the current bill as it is.
Okay. Well, thank you. So we've got so the next question I have. Congratulations. At the same time that new representation is welcome for our district, it is also true that Westchester County is losing 2 senior representatives, Engel and Lowy, who are both chairs of important congressional committees. Please comment on how you think this will impact Districts 16 and 17. Thank you.
I think there will be a lot of improvements in terms of a focus on some of the inequality that's existed within the district for a very long time. I know myself, I'm committed to raising my voice and leveraging my experiences to bring attention to the issues that matter most, so that I'm not just working for the benefit of the district from a policy perspective, but also from an advocacy perspective. And I think while Congresswoman Lowy and Congressman Engel had a lot of internal relationships that were beneficial for them and for the district, I think where myself and Mondaire, and I don't want to speak for Mondaire, so I'll just speak for myself. I think the influence on public opinion and the ability to build relationships on the outside that can help curb relationships on the inside matter tremendously, which will help lead to more support of policies that need to be put forth. If you look at the recent DCCC race between Sean Patrick Maloney and Tony Cardenas, number one, Sean Patrick Maloney was able to win pretty convincingly, but also, in my conversations with him and the conversations with many others, you could see a shift already happening with the DCCC centering issues that matter most to this district and across the country. So our external advocacy and raising our voices in different ways, I think, give us a leg up, even though Congresswoman Lowy and Congressman Engel were there for several decades, longer than we were.
Okay, thank you. So next question. Hi, as part of the Progressive Caucus, could you share your views on United States-Israel relations going forward?
Well, let's figure out a way to get to peace in the region, and to figure out a way for the people of Palestine and the people of Israel to live together in harmony and in peace. We've been having this conversation for several decades. I think Netanyahu has done a lot to undermine the relationship and undermine a movement towards peace. I think the annexing of territory and some of the things that he's done is not where we need to be, and we need to be very critical of him with regard to that. But I want to figure out how to get to a place of peace, not just in that region, but in many parts of the world where, whether it's Saudi Arabia and Yemen, whether it's China and what's happening there, whether it's South America and Central America, we need to be diplomatic leaders, and we need to hold leaders throughout the world who are not adhering to or responding to human rights. We need to hold them accountable. And unfortunately, I think Netanyahu and his relationship with Trump and the far right is undermining a lot of the work that's been done prior to now. So a lot more work to be done there, obviously.
Okay. I have a few questions that will go into various types of policies maybe we haven't talked about. Somebody asks, will you support the EPA and push for the reversal of the environmental regulations that were put in place by the Trump administration?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just to add on to that, do you have any comments or elaboration on broadly on the environment or climate change issues?
It's right after the coronavirus. It's the number one thing we need to focus on as a nation and as a planet. We have, some say, 4 years to get it right, to end our dependence on fossil fuels and to move towards 100% clean, renewable energy. I'm targeting the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, as well as the Science and Tech Committee, to focus on this issue from the perspective of the EPA and other agencies, to make sure that our resources are going towards getting us to clean, renewable energy. That means ending our subsidies on fossil fuels and investing that money on clean energy. That means building new infrastructure and new technology that will get us to a place of net zero carbon emissions. That's new public housing, that's new public schools, that's retrofitting current infrastructure, that's stopping the leakage from Mount Vernon sewage pipes, water pipes into the Long Island Sound, that's responding in Mamaroneck and Yonkers to the infrastructure needs. So that requires tremendous investments, and Joe Biden's investment of $2 trillion to dealing with environmental injustice is critical, but that's just a start. We have a lot more work to do over the next 5 to 10 years to make sure we get to net zero within 10 years, not 30 years. That'll be way too late.
Okay. You may have just partially answered this question. What are your top 3 issues you plan to tackle?
Well, COVID, environment, and racial justice. Those are the top 3. And coupled with racial justice is any policy that discriminates against anyone because of who they are, and any policy that supports the oppression of anyone because of who they are. And when I talk about racial justice, I want to be very clear. That has evolved to not just include police reform and reform in terms of mass incarceration, but the issue of economic inequality also continues to persist because of a lack of focus on racial justice and an unwillingness to even deal with the issue, quite frankly, from our federal government. So those are the 3.
Okay. Here's one. Given that economically disadvantaged students have suffered the most from remote education, what are your plans to close the gap in education that has only grown during the pandemic?
Well, we need to focus on early childhood education from birth to age 8. And that involves universal childcare. That involves investing in Head Start. And that involves making sure that teachers and educators are empowered to create curriculum and learning opportunities for kids in early childhood so that they can thrive throughout their time in our schools. In the moment, that also involves making sure all kids have access to the hardware and Wi-Fi necessary to even access remote learning opportunities. Because right now in New York City, we still have tens of thousands of kids who don't have a laptop, and the city has no plan to put anything in place. In the short term, it also involves hiring more teachers and tutors to give kids more one-on-one learning opportunities, because that's the only way they're going to be able to catch up and keep up. But long term, it's about early childhood education. It's about universal childcare. It's about more teachers to lower class size. And it's about focusing more on teaching and learning than we do on state standardized testing without the resources on the front end.
Okay. Thank you. So the next one, kind of related. It's not really a question, but I'll give this to you anyway. A little interlude. Just wanted to say hi, Jamaal. I retired after 27 years as a middle school principal on Long Island and here in Mamaroneck after teaching in New York City. I think if you can handle middle school, there's a very good chance you can handle Washington, D.C. Good luck.
Thank you for that. I've heard that many times, and after spending 2 weeks at orientation, I think you're exactly right. Definitely my middle school principal experience has prepared me for all of the shenanigans that has happened in orientation. Just really quickly, I don't know if you have all been following, but so first of all, our Republican colleagues are very interesting, to say the least. There are 2 QAnon supporters who are now in Congress. And from day one, they were asking questions about not wanting to wear masks not following the medical protocols. They just want to completely do their own thing. And then there were other Republican colleagues that want to bring guns into the Capitol, and they want to keep guns in their office because they take their guns everywhere. So this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with, and this is so funny. I never had a student ask me about guns in the Bronx middle school around the corner from projects, but we have Republicans in Congress asking those questions. It's fascinating. But yes, I think I'm prepared as a result of that experience for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you. That is intriguing about bringing guns to the Capitol. So back to a more policy related question. The campaign finance system needs a lot, or feeds a lot of inequities. Forgive me. Will you advocate for reform?
Yeah, so HR one is the huge reform that the Democratic Party is focused on overall, but particularly Democrats in the House. It passed the House during the 116th Congress, which is huge. So we're going to work to make sure it passes again in the 117th. But again, if Mitch McConnell's in power in the Senate, it's going to be hard for HR one to pass the Senate. But HR one completely overhauls our campaign finance system. I support publicly financed campaigns. I support overturning Citizens United. Corporations are not people, and money is not free speech. And it's just another example of how, we call it slavery by another name. It's the financial control of our political system and the economic oppression of the majority of us. So HR one is the big one, but we got to win Georgia in order to get something huge done within this Congress. But if we don't win Georgia, in 2 years, we can win other seats in the Senate, flip the Senate, and then disempower Mitch McConnell. So as we all know, democracy is a contact sport, and we have to continue to fight. But HR one, yes, is the big one that I support.
Okay, thank you. In a deeply divided Congress, what issue or issues do you see as most likely for finding common ground?
So from an education perspective, career and technical education is a big one, because even Republicans in the Midwest support career and technical education. They support getting out of high school, getting a job, and supporting your family. I support that as well. So that is a place of common ground. Also, the issue of maternal mortality is something that Congresswoman Lauren Underwood created a momnibus bill during the last Congress that received a lot of bipartisan support. But quite honestly, until we get out of the era of Trump and where we are now, and I think it's going to take, personally, I think it's going to take Democrats taking control of the Senate for us to get to a point of bipartisan legislation. I mean, right now, everything is tremendously polarized. They have been for a long time, but Trump has made it 10 times worse. And I think it's going to take us having power of all three before we can reach a hand out and say, hey, who on the other side is ready to govern this nation in a bipartisan way? 74 million people voted for Donald Trump, despite everything he represented. So we're still hyper polarized and hyper partisan. But there are a few issues, like I mentioned, that we can begin to bridge the gap on. Not many of the big structural issues, unfortunately, but those are two keys that we could begin the conversations around.
Okay. Another policy question. Again, I'm reading this verbatim. I'm not surprised I haven't heard anything about antitrust legislation, but I was wondering whether you have any views on the passage of antitrust legislation to curb the power of the corporate monopolies.
Absolutely. Zephyr Teachout is one of my mentors, and she's continuously advised me on antitrust legislation and anti-monopoly legislation. First of all, we need to enforce what's currently on the books, and we're not doing that nearly enough. AG Barr has done a lot wrong, but his going after Google and looking to break up Google is a big step in the right direction. But we're talking about big banks, we're talking about big tech, and we're talking about big agriculture. That again is a part of a system that concentrates wealth in the hands of a few over the many. So yes, we have to break up all big corporations because it kills competition, it kills small business, and contributes to wealth inequality. So yes, that's something I support 100%.
Okay. The next one, back to healthcare. Please elaborate on your position on the Affordable Care Act. Do you believe the Affordable Care Act can be improved by adding a public option, or do you want to eliminate private insurance altogether and replace it with Medicare?
I want everyone in America insured. That's it. I want everyone in America, everyone in the world, really, to have access to exemplary health insurance. Through our proposal, and what I support is universal health care through Medicare for all single payer system. The Affordable Care Act with a public option, if that ensures everyone, that's great. But as I mentioned before, we shouldn't have, well, as I alluded to before, we shouldn't have private health insurance making decisions in terms of the healthcare people receive in the healthcare system. That's unacceptable. And private health insurance, like many other corporations, are part of big monopolies as well. The bottom line is, I want every American should be insured. Every American, every person should receive exemplary health care, and we need to figure out how to get that done.
Okay. The next question goes a little further afield. Do you have views on the U.S. role in the world regarding philosophy of our country, or regarding the philosophy our country has had since World War II, that the U.S. should have the strongest military in the world, resulting in half the federal government's discretionary income going to the Pentagon?
Yeah, I think we need to dramatically decrease the amount of funding that goes toward the Pentagon. I think we need to dramatically decrease our military presence in the world. And I think we need to focus on reinvesting in diplomacy, in climate change, and in what I call a 21st century Marshall Plan. We have disrupted political and economic systems the world over for several decades, hundreds of years actually. And we've taken the perspective of military might is the ultimate power. And if we have that power, we have control. And if we have control, we can manipulate what happens in the world. But as a result, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people have died throughout history, and hundreds of millions of people are suffering as a result, living on less than $1 a day. That has evolved also into an economic system and globalization, which again is part of a multinational, multi-international initiative that is just about wealth and power. So for me, I think the U.S. should use its power, quote unquote, to rebuild a world of peace and diplomacy and compassion, and move away from this idea of scarcity and this idea that one nation or people has to conquer another via violent means. I believe we all can live in the world peacefully. And that's the foreign policy I support, and that's the foreign policy philosophy that I support as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, bringing next questions a little closer to home. We know affordable housing is inequitably distributed in lower income neighborhoods, less in higher income neighborhoods. What can we do federally to ensure rich towns like Larchmont cannot unilaterally block such developments?
Well, federal policy that deals with equitable zoning is part of that conversation, so that we can have more affordable housing in places like Larchmont, Scarsdale, and other places. I think so. There's that, but then there's also the importance of investing in communities that have been determined to be of less value and low income. I mean, the concept of redlining, which happened as part of the GI Bill right after the Great Depression and World War II, literally gave hundreds of billions of dollars of resources to build a white suburban middle class and kept Black people out. 90% of the loans over 98% of federal loans that were subsidized over a 30-year period went to white families. And the Black community was left out and forced into communities of concentrated poverty and then devalued because of the race of those communities through redlining. So it's about equitable zoning to build more affordable housing in places that people want to move to, absolutely. But it's also about reinvesting in communities that we've redlined on purpose and make those communities more livable and sustainable for the people who are there, as opposed to what tends to happen, which is gentrification, where wealthy developers come in, they build, they let wealthy people move in, and they force the people who live there to move out. So it's both equitable zoning and access to higher income communities, but it's also about righting the wrongs of history related to redlining so that communities of color can have access to capital, access to housing, and access to land as well.
Okay, thank you. So the next two questions I think head more in a political direction, although they certainly overlap with policy. So first one I'll read. Following up on the environmental question, as a lifelong Democrat, I think there's an opportunity long-term to turn states like Texas and Ohio blue and win Senate seats in toss-up states like Pennsylvania. Your new Democratic colleague, Connor Lamb, has pointed out how hard it will be to win over swing voters in such states if Democrats continue to oppose fracking, given how many well-paying jobs gas drilling has generated. Is there a middle ground on this issue?
Well, not for me. I think fracking should be banned. And I think we should invest in clean, renewable energy and continue to create jobs in a clean, renewable economy. And I believe there's a transition toward that that can happen, that could be very lucrative and ensure that the people that are working in the fracking industry now will have jobs in the clean, renewable energy industry. But I've never been to Connor Lamb's district. I don't know the needs of the people there, so I can't really speak to that from here. But I know our environment cannot sustain the consistent growth of the fossil fuel industry and the fracking industry. I mean, just recently we had a very minor tropical storm that hit our region that took power away from people for a week to 2 weeks. It was a minor storm. Those storms are only going to get more severe. In addition to the forest fires out west, in addition to the famine that's happening in different parts of the world. So, I disagree with Connor there, but I haven't been to his district, and every district is unique and different. And, he has to figure out what that looks like there. But overall, our planet needs to end our dependence on fossil fuels, and we need to figure out how to get there as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, thank you. So the next one, I think, is less policy and more political. Many columnists and analysts have said the Democrats have lost people in Congress and did not do all that well in state elections. The writers have said the left wing of the Democratic Party has been referring to themselves as socialists and talking about defunding the police and supporting demonstrations that have resulted in major damage to buildings. See what happened in Portland, Oregon, in this past week. These words, defund the police versus support teaching racial tolerance and changing the way police do things, have turned off a large part of rural America, which prevented the Dems from increasing the number of elected officials.
Was that a statement or a question?
That was that's a good question, but obviously seeking your comment or point of view on the general discussion.
Yeah. So if I'm running for office in any community and I don't support defunding the police and I am not a socialist and the people in that community do not support defund the police and are not socialists, I don't know how my opponent is able to successfully paint me as someone who supports that if that is not what I support. We meaning the Democratic Party and individuals running in particular districts, we should never allow Republicans to paint us as something that we are not, and take that as far enough where they ultimately win an election against us. To me, that's more an indictment on myself. That's more an indictment on the work I did not do to build relationships with my constituents and to help them get a clear understanding of who I am. That's what that speaks to more to me. Even in this race, during our primary, Congressman Engel tried to paint me as a lot of things. But because myself and my team did a good enough job, we think, of connecting with people and communicating who we were, those things didn't land and we were able to win. So I'm not saying everyone across the country should run as a socialist or run on defunding the police or whatever it is. The point is you have to respond to the needs of the constituents in your district. And if you're doing that in a powerful way, then you should be able to win. And I think overall with the Democratic Party, I think we run too much based on fear. And I think we allow Republicans to flip narratives into weapons against us that we ultimately then have to respond to instead of doing a better job of being proactive and offensive and communicating who we are and what we want and providing a clear vision for our districts. You know, we're always on our heels, we're always playing defense, and we're not visionary or mission driven and building the infrastructure we need to win and win big and win consistently. You know, negative ads have been around forever, you know, so I disagree with the notion overall that, you know, defund the police or socialism led to someone's lost hundreds of miles from a place where those policies do resonate.
Mhm. Oh, thank you. Now a completely different type of question. What books have you recently read or movies or TV shows you have watched that you would recommend?
It's a great question. So right now I'm reading From Here to Equality by Robert Darity and Kirsten Mullen. It's about the legacy of racism in this country and the need to move towards a conversation of reparations. It's a really good book, something I highly recommend. Break 'em Up is a book about breaking up the big banks and big corporations, written by Zephyr Teachout, which is also very good. Recent movies. You know, during my downtime recently, I've been watching a lot of like Marvel movies. So I don't know if any of those have any benefit, but I did see something recently that was really good that I'm losing right now. Oh, HBO Max, Between the World and Me. It's a depiction of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, um, in visual storytelling form. Very powerful. It's something I definitely recommend. And yeah, I guess, yeah, if I think of something else, I'll let you know. But good question.
All right, thank you. Back to a few more policy ones. Do you have any thoughts or experience regarding the adult disability community, i.e. funding for group homes, waiting lists for group homes, government keeping disabled at bay from accessing Social Security disability insurance, Medicaid, and the like?
Yes, we have to aggressively, fully fund and fully support our adults with disabilities and our children with disabilities. Both are marginalized, ignored, and othered within our current system. I mean, our federal Individuals with Disabilities Act has never been funded at more than 40%. And this is why our children with disabilities continue to be underserved in our schools across the country. But yes, in terms of housing, in terms of access to employment, in terms of pipelines and infrastructure towards job development. All of these things need to be in place and need to be a part of all federal policy. This is part of the social safety net that has been decimated over the last several decades by Democrats and Republicans and Democrats, excuse me. So yes, a lot more work needs to be done there. I'm fingers crossed. Hopefully, going to get onto the Education and Labor Committee, which will help me to push legislation through that committee in this area as soon as we get started. So 100% with you on that. Absolutely.
Okay. There was, I think it was an earlier question about committees as well. So you just mentioned that committee. Are there any others that you're looking to join or be part of as you enter Congress?
So first of all, they're all awesome committees. Like everyone, I can see myself doing good work on them. The two I targeted was education and labor and transportation and infrastructure. We all know the infrastructure and transportation needs in our district, but that committee is hard to get on for freshmen. And me putting that as a second committee may make it tough. So another committee may be science and technology that we're looking at as well. We also looked at financial services, which is an exclusive committee, which is tough, as well as the judiciary. But definitely ed and labor, and then we'll see what happens with the second one.
Okay. There was also an earlier question, judiciary reminds me. What is your view on the question's a little leading on packing the Supreme Court, or maybe just broadly on the Supreme Court in general?
I support growing the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, the 9-member Supreme Court has been in place since 1898, when the country was 1/10 its current size. And right now, per cycle, for every 8,000 cases submitted to the Supreme Court, only about 80 are heard. So the Supreme Court doesn't have the capacity at the moment to respond to the needs of the American people. So I support growing the Supreme Court just because it has to be more responsive than it currently is. In addition to the fact that right now we have a 6-3 ultra conservative majority. So the Affordable Care Act, marriage equality, women's right to choose are all on the table right now in terms of being taken away, especially if Republicans maintain control of the Senate. So we have to win Georgia, we have to take the Senate, and I think we have to grow the Supreme Court. This is all part of like reforming the infrastructure of our democracy overall. I think the Electoral College should be a part of that conversation, as well as the filibuster as well. And not just for the sake of who's in power gets to manipulate one thing in his favor over the other. It's just how do we create a government that works together for the needs of all people? And currently we don't have that, and that's obviously what we need.
Okay. Follow up to the response you gave on the defund the police movement and the use of the term socialist. Can you please answer the question of whether you support the defund the police movement and maybe explain what you see it as, and see yourself as a socialist, and if so, how you define the term?
Yeah, so I do support the defund the police movement. We invest way too much money in law enforcement and not enough in housing and food and jobs and education. So it's all about reallocating resources towards the areas that truly support public health and public safety. Only about 5% of police work deals with violent crimes. The other 95% could be handled by other agencies if those infrastructures were in place. Currently, they are not, and I think we need to put those infrastructures in place. And too often, we have police responding to domestic issues and mental health issues, etc. And people are ending up dead because police are trained one way and not trained to do these other things. And we ask our police to do way too much. I identify as a Black man in America, and my values and my experiences and how I was raised by my mother is rooted in who I am. Because I support universal health care and housing as a human right, and think everyone should have a job and live fulfilled lives, that term socialist is used. So if that's what it means to be a socialist, I'm fine with that. But I identify more with my personal and professional experiences and the history that I learn of this country and of the world, more so than I identify with a political ideology.
Mhm.
My experience as a Black man in America informs who I am and what I believe.
Okay. Um, so, so thank you. I'll just point out we're near the 11 o'clock hour. In our experience, these events usually go about an hour and 15, an hour and 20 before the average natural human tolerance for Zoom really begins to waver. So we thinking, are you okay, Congressman-elect, with another 10 or 15 minutes of questions? Does your schedule permit it?
Nope.
I think I've seen a few come in, and but I think we are, tapering off at this point.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's work within that time frame. So there was one of our fellow members in the subject of books and movies recommends the book Cast by Isabella Wilkerson to everybody. Just use this to share. I have heard that as well from multiple members within my own family, and it's in my list of books to read whenever I get to read books. Another question. It looks like a picture behind you says Dad and is an original piece of art. Do you want to show us?
Sure. That is yes. That's an original piece of art for my daughter Maya. She's 6 years old now. I think she did that when she was about 4.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got her like an easel and some paint and let her go crazy, and everything that she created we hung up at different parts of the house. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is other than her messing around with some colors. Yes, an original piece of art. Yes.
Okay. Terrific. Okay. Back to a policy question. You mentioned reparations. Do you have a position on reparations, and please explain?
Oh yes, I support reparations for the descendants of slaves. Absolutely. I think as we reconcile with our history, I hope we go through, and I will propose going through a process of truth and reconciliation. I think our country needs that process and that healing as much as any nation. It happened in Rwanda, it happened in South Africa, it happened in Germany. It needs to happen here. The legacy of slavery is not over. It's not gone. It's still here. After slavery, there was supposed to be 40 acres and a mule given to the formerly enslaved. That did not happen. But through the Homestead Act, millions of acres were given to white Americans, both native and foreign born. That came right before then we had Jim Crow segregation and white terror that happened then, and then the civil rights movement, and then mass incarceration that happened right after that. And then we continue to see, I mean, just 2 days ago in Ohio, 23-year-old Black man shot 3 times in the back in his own home. They thought he had a gun. He had a sandwich in his hand, and we all saw the murder of George Floyd. So this unfortunately is continuing, and I think one way to heal from that is the acknowledgement of the history, the apology for it, but also restitution going forward, whether that's in the form of housing, higher education, cash payments, whatever. This is something that other nations have done for other people, and it's something that I think if we want to move forward as a nation in a truly healthy and equal way, we need to have serious conversations about.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the answer. I guess I'll follow up on that a little bit. Let's assume hypothetically, very hypothetically, that the new Congress convenes on January 6th, and reparations is taken up as a policy or a thing to be carried out. How might you see the process unfolding for that? How might that actually happen?
What happened? Us getting to a point of taking up reparations as a particular
Having a direct debate as congressional legislation, and how it might be executed. Because while you do correctly make the parallels, certainly many of us are aware of the German reparations to Jewish people, to the state of Israel. How does that manifest itself? It's a different set of conditions, in this country. And I'm not judging it. I'm not saying better or worse, but different. How would our country today approach the issue?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One, we HR 40 over the last 30 years has attempted to authorize a commission to study the need for reparations. We haven't even gotten that far yet. So HR 40 being marked up in committee and then taken to the floor for a vote needs to happen. So those things haven't even happened. It hasn't even been marked up in committee. I would love to see it marked up in committee, brought to the floor for a vote, and then a commission authorized to convene a study. Now, that doesn't have to happen during HR 40. President-elect Biden can authorize it through executive order, which I would encourage him to do. And then the study would be convened, and we would look at the outcomes of, in terms of health, economics, education, with regard to the African American community, and then decide what restitution, if any, should be provided. For me, that includes, one, identifying the descendants of slaves in this country. Two, some sort of cash recompense as part of it. Three, housing and land as part of that conversation. And four, access to higher education as part of it. That's what it would look like for me on the back end. But we haven't even marked it up yet. So let's hopefully take that first step and then begin this long process, which will hopefully be not too long. And then finally, I would say it would include a series of hearings, a series of hearings on truth and reconciliation hearings on the impact of this continued legacy in our country. And I think those hearings are going to be incredibly powerful, because it's the first time we're looking at ourselves in the mirror as a nation, acknowledging the harms and then acknowledging the need to do something about it. I think those hearings would be most powerful.
Okay, thank you. I think we're getting down to the last questions. So I'll just say we're closed to new questions to anyone in our audience. So this one, I don't think you've quite been asked, but may have touched on it. How do you see the American government improving its policies towards the indigenous people, Native Americans?
It's a really good question. So I think climate is a big part of this question, because when we talk about agriculture, natural resources, and land, that obviously involves the indigenous people and their history and their legacy and where they currently occupy. That's one of the reasons why we support Deb Haaland as new Secretary of the Interior, so she can be a leading voice in dealing with that issue. But when you look at the Native American community, when you look at poverty rates, when you look at the impact of COVID, when you look at alcoholism, when you look at other issues, it's similar to what we see in other historically marginalized and oppressed communities. So that has to be dealt with from a social and economic perspective, but also from an education perspective. It's interesting. Going to school in New York City, we learned about Native Americans in the past tense, as if they currently do not exist any longer. Which, one, speaks to the impact of the genocide, but two, speaks to my ignorance growing up and the ignorance of many others in terms of who they are, where they are, what those needs are, and how to address those needs. But it's something I need to study a lot more. But something that we have to fully be much more supportive of our indigenous people, because, like many other groups, they've been marginalized and forgotten about. But I think Deb Haaland serving as Secretary of the Interior would be a big step in the right direction for that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to present you two questions now. They're very similar, the overlap. So first one, I agree with you regarding many of the issues and inequities that you've identified, and we absolutely need to address them. Many of your solutions do not seem likely to resonate with the roughly half the country who identify as Republicans, and probably some of the more conservative Democrats. Are you willing to compromise with people who have their own life experiences that are different from yours and potentially accept half a loaf, or are you going to be dogmatic, much like so many of those on the right? It seems to me people are tired of rigidity and are anxious for compromise. That seems to be much of the attention to Biden. So the next question, a little more succinct, will you support President-elect Biden's moderate platforms, ACA, et cetera, even if they are not as progressive as you want them to be?
So the short question, the short answer to the second question is yes. But the fight continues in terms of working towards some of the points raised by the first question. Completely understand, completely agree, completely respect the need for compromise. But if compromise leads to my continued oppression and devaluing as a Black man in America, then that's unacceptable. I'm not compromising on that, nor am I compromising on the continued oppression of any people in this world. We have to end the terror and oppression of individuals and groups of people on this planet just because of simply who they are. And, for far too long, we've been asked to compromise and wait if we're Black, brown, poor, women, or other, based on your circumstances. And I just think that that's wrong, and that's unacceptable, and that's unnecessary, because, again, I believe we live in an abundant world with abundance of natural resources and human resources, and we could build a life of dignity for everyone. And we don't have to fear each other because of our race or religion or class or any of that. I just think, we have, this is a special opportunity, a special moment to use Biden's terms, build back better, and Trump revealed a lot of what's still out there. He revealed the ugliness within. And I just think that now that that's been revealed to us, how are we going to respond to that? Are we going to respond in resistance of it towards the belief in the work of building a more beautiful world for everyone? Or are we going to respond in fear and conflict with each other? I think I prefer the former rather than the latter.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm down to the last two questions. First question goes back to the defund the police. How would you answer the question when you call 911, no one would answer?
Defund the police doesn't mean abolish the police. That's not what it means. It means there are cities in this country where 1/3 to 40% of the budget goes towards law enforcement. That's absurd. We're asking police to do too much. So if someone needs to call 911 for an officer will still be there. But if someone needed to call 711 or 611 for another issue that the police shouldn't be responding to, someone will be there as well. So it's just a reallocation of resources. It doesn't mean abolish the police. It just means, and some of you may notice, police over occupy Black, brown, and poor communities, and they over incarcerate Black, brown, and poor people. And because these people are poor, they're more likely to stay in jail instead of getting out of jail. I mean, look at Khalif Browder. I don't know if you're familiar with the Khalif Browder case. This is a young man who was accused of stealing a book bag, was sent to Rikers Island because he couldn't afford bail, only accused, never charged. Because he couldn't afford bail, he stayed in Rikers Island for 2 years, was in solitary confinement, tortured while he was in prison, came out, couldn't cope with the mental distress. Oh, excuse me, let me not sugarcoat that last part. Was released without charge. Okay, so he was never charged with this crime. Came out, couldn't deal with the mental distress, ultimately committed suicide. Khalif Browder. Contrast that with Kyle Rittenhouse, okay, the domestic terrorist that murdered 2 people in Wisconsin, I believe, after the Jacob Blake shooting. He killed 2 people and was bailed out. He was able to afford the $2 million bail and was bailed out and is now out of jail. So that's the system we currently have. It's a system of mass incarceration that continues the legacy of racism and slavery in this country. It's wrong and it needs to change. So it doesn't mean abolish the police. It just means a decrease from that to something that provides more access to resources to people in Black, brown, and poor communities.
Okay. So, and now it's 11:15. I'll give you the last question and then we'll wrap up. As someone who's worked in the world of education, how can we adjust the curriculum, especially with regard to history, to give students a more accurate representation of America with regards to race and economic inequality, domestically as well as foreign policy?
It's a great question. So one of the things I'm going to introduce in Congress is what we are tentatively calling an anti-racist, anti-bigotry, anti-hate curriculum, civics curriculum that does everything you just said and is implemented within our K-12 school system. And the goal there is for everyone to graduate understanding the importance of civics engagement and understanding our role as human beings on the planet Earth and the true history of America, which has been written by, oh man, why am I forgetting the author of The People's History? Damn. It's been written already, but it needs to be codified into a curriculum that is systemically implemented over a K-12 setting. Because I believe to deal with issues of racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, sexism, xenophobia, we can do that through curriculum. We can also do it through integrated schools, racially and economically integrated schools. So my hope is an integrated school system with an anti-bigotry civics curriculum that teaches us more about our commonalities and our differences and graduates kids ready to participate civically and build a better world. That's a policy I'm going to introduce at the federal level, and hopefully it's something that has bipartisan support and is adopted and that we can move forward with.
Okay, thank you. I got 3 comments shot back that A People's History was written by Howard Zinn.
Thank you.
Z-I-N-N. Anyway, okay. Maybe now I give you an opportunity to offer any concluding remark, and also add. I think it was kind of a question. How do we stay in touch with you? How do our respective members or us as a congregation, continue to engage with you as you join Congress and serve our district?
Yes. So from the website now, you can always reach out. The email is us@bowmanforcongress.com. That's us@bowmanforcongress.com. You can always reach out there. We haven't built our office infrastructure out yet because of COVID. So the best way to reach us right now is via email. I believe there's a number on the website, but my team keeps me away from that number because they know I'll give it to everyone. But you can call that number, and someone from the staff will respond to you. So yeah, the email address us@bowmanforcongress.com or the phone number on the website.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I want to thank you, Congressman-elect Bowman, for spending the time with us this morning, answering questions, and telling us a lot about yourself and where you stand on various issues. I want to thank your Chief of Staff, Sarah Drisu, and Marty Cannengeiser of Brotherhood, who were instrumental in getting us all together this morning. And I want to thank everyone again for joining. Stay tuned for the next Brotherhood breakfast, which is January 24th, and then the subsequent breakfasts after that. More to come. We cover a wide range of speakers and topics. And with that, we will conclude. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great job, Larry and Marty.
Thanks, Congressman.
Join
Thank you.
Brotherhood, people.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Jane.
you. Thank you.
All right,
was
thank you.
wonderful. Thank you. Very interesting.
Jane.
Thank you.
great.
That was
Okay.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Have a good Sunday. Have a good Sunday.
Good night, John
All
Boy.
right.
Good night, Mary Ellen.
Everyone,
Hi,
Good
Elizabeth.
luck, Congressman-elect.
enjoy the rest of the weekend. I'm ending it now.